May I take this opportunity to introduce Professor Venkata Ramana. He's the Vice Chairman, Telangana State Council of Higher Education and Senior Professor, School of Management Studies, and Coordinator Technology Business Incubator Project at the University of Hyderabad. Prior to his present appointment, he was a senior-most professor at the School of Management Studies at the University of Hyderabad, where he also served as the dean for 7.5 years and has over 30 years of experience across different sectors spanning academics, industry, and board-level positions. He has extensively worked in the area of innovation, incubation, and entrepreneurship, and was the founder of the TBI, Technology Business Incubator at the University of Hyderabad. He has also served as the visiting professor at San Diego State University and other universities across the world. May I welcome him to be part of the panel? Thank you, sir. And thank you. I request Professor Srivastava to start the session.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir. So there's one more piece of information about Dr. Ramana. He's also a fellow at the IC Squared Institute, and I have been associated with IC Squared since 1983. And so it looks like a very incestuous relationship. So Arnoud and I spend considerable time in Singapore together. Now we see finding out an old Texas link. So I'll just keep some of my comments brief before I turn it over to the panelists. So when we're looking at innovation, there are a couple of things to recognize. One is that innovation is increasingly distributed globally. It's not just coming from the West. And we see, if we just look at the Indian context, if you look at the automotive sector, the two leading companies by market share are aligned with Suzuki, and the second one is Hyundai from Korea, and Suzuki is from, obviously from Japan. We look at our favorite handphones, the mobiles, and what do we see out there? It is again Samsung from Korea. And we see companies like Xiaomi, coming in from China. So a lot of innovation is actually taking place globally. Many of us are exposed to case studies about, let's say, Intel, and few of us know that the market in the semiconductor industry is now dominated by the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. So lots of innovation taking place in the tech sector. And one of the philosophies that we must follow in management education is to integrate ideas from the West and the East. The second thing is, if you look at the rate of innovation, it constantly keeps accelerating. And therefore, we can't go through this philosophy of theory-driven practice, that we do research work in academia and then industry adopts it. In many, many instances, such as fintech that we'll be dealing with today, a lot of innovations are actually coming from industry. And because the cycle itself is so short, in addition to theory-driven practice, perhaps we should look at practice-inspired theory, starting with the problem, starting with the opportunity, and then looking at what could be done. These problems that we're increasingly dealing with are much more complex, and they cannot be compartmentalized. So everybody talks about complexity, and we talk about what are called wicked problems, and the wicked problems cannot be solved by disciplinary approaches. Unfortunately, management education, the way it is set up, the way we are organized at ISB, and the way almost every management school is set up, is along disciplinary lines: finance, marketing, management, and so on and so forth. But increasingly, we really need to find out ways in which we can work together to solve fairly complex problems. This collaboration across disciplines actually needs to extend between academia, industry, and government. The government cannot be left out of the equation, because whether we like it or not, they set public policy. And we need to look at how can corporates work with public policy decision makers and also public administrators in order to take a crack at problems jointly. And we are now seeing situations, and I like to sometimes hold up my cell phone here and say, which industry or which ministry do people report to if they're working in the communications industry? Of course, it's the Ministry of Communications, but also it is consumer technology. Also, it is information systems, and it is becoming harder and harder to deal with the rapid change in innovation if we are not able to simultaneously integrate ideas, with the government. So to that extent, we need to look at how the three areas, industry, academia, and government, should work together. Then, because the rate of innovation is going up considerably, what we also need to worry about, while we're talking about multidisciplinary collaboration, we also have to worry about specialization at the same time, because the rate of innovation is so high that it is sometimes hard for people to look at issues in depth unless they're specializing. So it sounds like, a bit of a problem. At one stage we're saying be multidisciplinary. At the other time we're saying dig a hole, or have a study area that is narrower and narrower, and that makes things difficult. While all this is going on, there are changes, for example, that are coming out of the data sciences area, which are impacting pretty much everything. So now what we're seeing is that managers have to become more and more adept with evidence-based analysis. So you can't shoot from the hip anymore, because you'll have competitors who are able to analyze the information and who can make much more targeted and much more refined decisions. So that aspect is becoming important. I had already mentioned earlier the digital transformation of companies themselves, and senior managers being the least equipped to manage that. So I've been talking to some senior managers, and one of the things that they're worried about is there's so much information to process, and there's so much work on their shoulders that they're now talking about, can we as educators develop bite-sized knowledge that they can consume as needed, so just-in-time knowledge, if you will, and we as management schools are not really set up for that. One final comment I'll make, and then I'll hand it over to our panelists. And if we look at how technology has been leveraged in the West, for example, in MOOCs, the MOOCs haven't worked particularly well, let's say, in the United States. And the reason is that there must be at least 100 good business schools there. So if you have the option of learning from a computer, absorbing knowledge off a screen, versus interacting, the second method can be far more effective. But what is happening in emerging markets in countries like India is that if you don't get into some of the top, let's say, 20 institutions, there's a very rapid fall-off in terms of the quality of education one is receiving. So it is my guess that technology-enabled, or what is called blended learning processes, are going to take off a lot faster in India and in the other growth markets than we have seen in the West. And this will mean that technology itself will start disrupting the educational processes. So I've sort of laid down a little bit of my thinking, and let me hand it over to Arnoud, and then we will move on to Professor Ramana. After that, we will have an open dialogue with the audience. Arnoud, over to you.
Thank you. When it comes to the influence of disruption on education, I thought to split it, my contributions here in two parts. That is, first of all, what do I think is changing in the world? And of course, I don't have hours to do so, so I'll keep it to 5 points that I think are very important in terms of change in the world that have an impact on education. And secondly, once I have given these 5 changes, I want to go into what do we do about it when we are in education. And I can, of course, give a number of examples of what we do at Singapore Management University, but I will keep it broader than that, and I will think about what's going on in education worldwide. What are the 5 points that I see as major changes? And I will give them immediately and then come back to each of them one by one. That is, first of all, we're talking about technology today. Technology does have a big influence on what we're doing, on what the jobs are that we have, and what it means for education. Secondly, globalization plays a role, and Prof. Raj already indicated the fact that the sources of innovation have spread out in many different places in the world, that it's much more diffused than 50 or 60 years ago. But there are other types of globalization that are important. The third point I will make is that organizational structures, typical for organizations, for companies, are changing dramatically. The fourth point is the influence of data on everything we do. Data analytics, big data, the scandals recently around Facebook and Cambridge Analytics indicate that data has become part of our life and is influencing what we do very strongly. And the fifth point is a question about millennials, of which there are quite a few here in the room, but are they really different from other students that we had in the past? Let me come first of all to technology. It is very clear that technology has changed the nature of our jobs tremendously. Some of you, if you go to Google and you say, robots will, and you don't do anything more, you will get a number of follow-ups on robots will destroy jobs, robots will take away my work, whatever. It's so popular to talk today about the fact that automation will change our jobs. In fact, that was the popularization of that topic started probably with the work by Frey and Osborne from Oxford University, who published in 2013 this sort of prediction of which jobs would disappear and which jobs would survive. And they got the attention of the international media because they indicated that 99% of the accountants would be automated, which for a president of a university that has a school of accountancy is quite a dramatic statement. But that the jobs you really need to go to in, because they would not be automated, was professional trainers or clergy. So going into religion seems to be still a very good job. Now, this was a very popular research, and of course we are at a business school, right, and I come from a university. The moment that academics come up with some new good ideas, there are immediately hundreds of other academics available to dispute that and try to come up with alternatives. There has been a lot of debate about that particular type of research, but I would say that I was most recently most impressed by a study that was done by the OECD, and that somehow puts a lot more perspective in these original points made by Frey and Osborne. And they sort of indicate the OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, this club of rich countries, indicated that worldwide about 14% of the jobs are highly vulnerable. In other words, 70% of the content of those jobs will be automated. And about 32%, so 32 plus 14, but 32% is vulnerable. Between 50 and 70% of the job content will be automated. So close to 50% of the jobs will be heavily affected by automation. Now that is not so different from what other people have been writing, but this OECD report makes two other very interesting points. They have actually looked at different countries and said which are the countries that are most vulnerable to automation. And it turns out it's the middle income countries. The rich countries, the jobs in the rich countries have already been automated. And the ones that are staying there, the ones that have stayed in countries like Germany, Northern Europe, Japan, the ones that are still left over are jobs that are a lot more difficult to automate. So the countries that are vulnerable to automation, where jobs will disappear, are the middle income countries. And then interesting enough, there is a comparison between Korea and Canada where they looked at manufacturing jobs, and where it turns out that manufacturing jobs in Korea is still 30% of the GDP, are far less vulnerable to Canadian manufacturing jobs for automation. And this is a bit intriguing. Why is a job in a factory in Korea less easy to automate, less easy to replace by a robot than a job in Canada in manufacturing? Because both are two well-developed, industrialized countries. It turns out that it is about how the jobs are defined. That in Korea, many more manufacturing jobs are all-round jobs, which are about not only executing something in a factory, but at the same time using your creativity, your knowledge, your education to solve small problems perhaps, but problems in the factory. And that human ingenuity of solving issues is something that is still very difficult to replace, very difficult to automate. So the point I really want to make about technology is the jobs are changing. Virtually all jobs will be affected by automation, but not all jobs will be affected in the same way, and that probably has the big implications for how we organize ourselves, how we organize our economies, and how we organize education for those economies. By the way, as a footnote, in those most recent indicators of the OECD, Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, the jobs that have the least, or will be the least affected by automation are those of teachers. So I still feel quite safe. Second point that I want to make is that globalization is going to affect us. Raj already made a reference to it, but it is perhaps a different globalization than the one we have seen the last 20 to 25 or 30 years. The globalization that enabled countries like China and to some extent India, to come on the world economic scene and become major players. It is not by coincidence that the United States have elected a president who is actually trying to reduce global trade or trying to put at least some limitations on global trade. We may be surprised every day by how President Trump is communicating it, but we shouldn't forget that both candidates for the job were actually against the Trans-Pacific Partnership or wanted to renegotiate it, and were actually in favor of more constraints on global trade. So we may well see a different type of globalization, maybe more a globalization of communications, a globalization of investments, a globalization of mobility of people, etc. Maybe a globalization of organizations that are becoming very independent of countries. And when you see the debates that are ongoing here, but also in Europe, about the role of an Apple, a Facebook, a Google, an Amazon, and how they actually escape control by the governments, by the national governments, in many cases, don't pay their taxes where they should pay them, etc. You see that there is a type of globalization ongoing that is very different from the globalization of trade that was so characteristic of the late 90s, the early 2000s, or actually also 100 years ago, before the First World War. The third point that is really dramatically changing is the organizational structures of the organizations, of the companies in which we work. We tend to forget that the traditional hierarchical structure that we find in many companies and organizations is actually basically only 170 years old. It was probably developed in the mid-19th century by the, at that moment, growing companies of the first industrial revolution. Before that, we didn't have those organizations. The United East India companies that were doing trade with, between Europe and this country, but also Southeast Asia and China, were not hierarchically structured companies, but they were partnerships of individuals who worked with each other, who would organize a ship and own the ship together, work on that ship together. It was not the traditional structure. It was actually sharing of existing infrastructure to together make a buck. That sounds very much like Uber and Airbnb. Share your infrastructure with others to make money out of it. Maybe we're going back to organizational structures which we used to have before the beginning of the first industrial revolution. Organizational structures that are linked to what they call now the gig economy, shared infrastructure, shared cars, etc., etc. I strongly believe that my students who are now starting at SMU will in 10 or 15 years from now work in very different organizations than the one we are used to. My fourth point is about data content. All products now become very much data driven. We see for the first time in the last few weeks and few months some big questioning about that, about what are people doing with my data. On the other hand, we all give our data with pleasure away. I dream of this. I travel a lot by airplanes, and I have seen my luggage disappear in the wrong direction many times. I dream of this luggage that will say, I'm in the wrong plane, right? So that I can program my luggage and says, I'm going to go to Hyderabad or tonight back to Singapore. It doesn't get in the other plane. Or if it gets in the other plane, that it calls the porter and says, please take me out again, because I need to be in that other SQ plane that goes to Singapore. It's a simple example, but I would be so happy to share my data if that creates value for what I'm doing, if that creates value in the way I behave. And on the other hand, yes, I am on Facebook, and I'm a bit embarrassed that my former colleagues of the Judge Business School had developed such great algorithms that they can actually influence elections all over the world. I mean, I was very proud of that unit when I was still the dean of the business school. I'm not sure what I would do now with all that bad publicity around it. But we are living in an age where we love data content. We love the value that we can create out of data content. Lots of the companies around here, around ISB, are actually living on exploiting data. We teach at the business schools, at the accountancy schools, data analytics. I'm increasing the group of data analysts and people who can teach data analytics at the university. And at the same time, I'm probably strengthening the people in my law school who will think about privacy protection, etc. It is a tension that we have to live with. And finally, my fifth point about change relevant to this discussion is about millennials. Are the people that I'm educating today at SMU, that you are educating today at Indian School of Business, or if there are other educators in this room that we are educating at any institution of the world, are they different from us 20, or as you can see from my white hair, 40 years ago? And the answer is actually yes. It is true that people who have never lived without a smartphone, and I have the first generation coming into the university that can't remember that there were no smartphones in the world. If you have people coming into the university that are used to have all the data at their fingertips, that can check whatever the boss or the professor is saying in front of the class, or the boss in an organization, and can verify whether he or she is telling the truth or spreading fake news, that is a different type of employee, a different type of student than the one we had 10, 15, 20 years ago. I'll give you one statistic. At SMU, we have a library. Yeah, some of you may not remember what that is, but it was sort of a building in which we had stacks with books and things like that, right? We still have a library, but in 2012 we decided that we would go electronic on that library. The president and me thought, great, I will be able to save space, I will be able to turn that into offices. We were successful. We had at that moment 60,000 physical books and 58,000 electronic books. Today I have 58,000 physical books and 395,000 e-books, and then all the databases that come with us. Do you think I gained any square meters in the library? None. Because all the students hang out there. That's what students now all over the world do, hanging out in libraries, spending time together with earphones, a laptop, and sitting next to each other. Not at home, but at the university, in that place that I had hoped to turn into offices. I've actually lost space, because the students spend more time together, interacting, exchanging, chatting, whatever they do with each other, but they want to hang out together. The need for social interaction is still there. Millennials are changing, their behavior is changing, and we need to adjust to that. Now, having given those 5 simple statements, technology is affecting jobs, globalization is changing in nature, organizations may well go back to what they were before the first industrial revolution. Data is everywhere, and we're living with that sort of tension between I want to give away my data because then I get a better service, but nobody should know what I'm doing. That tension is there. The data content of products is increasing significantly. And then, yes, because we have data at our fingertips, sometimes even knowledge at our fingertips, millennials have changed significantly in their behavior. What does that do to us in educational institutions? And I have 4 points. My first point is that we have to really reflect deeply about the pedagogy we use. I am educated in a time that the professor was a sage on stage. After a while, we didn't stand anymore on the stage. We walked around. That was called interactive classrooms. Now we're not even a sage anymore, because all the knowledge is available online. The way we create a learning environment, and I really carefully avoid the word teaching, because teaching is something of the 20th century. What we need to do in educational institutions today is create a learning environment where people can have a holistic education, where they learn in the classroom but also outside the classroom, where they learn from the professor but also from what's on internet available and what their colleagues are telling them, where they learn from international experiences and become culturally savvy, where they learn perhaps from being a good citizen and doing service to the society, where they learn how to learn from projects. We have invested heavily at SMU in what we call SMU-X, X standing for experiential learning, learning from real world projects. But not only learning from the projects, but learn how to learn from the projects, the meta-learning, learning how to learn from projects in the future. So a deep reflection on the pedagogy in this very changing world. And frankly speaking, I don't have a good answer. We are experimenting at SMU. We're trying out new things, and I know that other institutions are doing the same. But hopefully, through all this experimentation, we will learn what needs to be done. Secondly, I think we need to offer students a lot more flexibility. In fact, I would like to put the responsibility for the learning and for the curriculum on the students. You have to determine, as a student, what you want to study and how you want to study it. Not anymore like in my time that my professors told me, this is what you need to do, that's the exam you're going to achieve, and if you've done that, I give you a degree. I believe very much more in an environment in which the students takes responsibility for his or her own learning. Accountability is with the students, not only with the faculty. That will, and that's my third point, require a lot of better and much more and better learning analytics. We're experimenting in SMU and in the School of Information Systems, but also in the School of Accountancy and the Business School, with systems whereby we say, these are the competencies that we actually want you as a student to learn in a particular course. We determine what the competencies are, and then through quizzes, surveys, whatever, throughout the course we will build up heat maps of how well you do. Very interesting for the student because they understand and suddenly, oh, I didn't understand what the faculty was trying to share here with me. Also very good for the faculty because they see heat maps of what they taught well and what they didn't teach very well. Not anymore these old-fashioned survey questionnaires whereby you basically have a popularity test of what the faculty really is all about. No, real, almost immediate feedback on have the students understood what I'm teaching or what I'm sharing. Quite an unpleasant experience for some faculty members. Third point, as I said, better analytics. Fourth point, I also believe that we will see a very different type of institutions. Universities used to be places in one place, or not places, but they used to be institutions in one place, very well contained, taking students between 18 and 28 years old. And afterwards, we didn't care about them anymore. They have been very successful. Let's not forget that some of the institutions that are called universities today exist for 800 or more years. I used to work at Cambridge, and we were proud that we were created by some renegades from Oxford who came to Cambridge to run away from Oxford because they had murdered somebody there. You may not know that, but Cambridge was created by murderers who ran away as far as possible from Oxford so that they couldn't be caught by the police. And then were thinking about what shall we do, and the only thing they could do was teaching, so they started another university. Some of these universities have been very successful. 800 years old, 900 years old. Bologna is 900 or even more than that old. Very successful. But I do believe that we will have to adjust very, very dramatically. Probably going into a lot more alliances, sharing courses with each other. Probably students will not stay with us for the whole of their curriculum. They already don't do it nowadays. We call it exchange programs. But very soon it will be, I do my first year here, my second year over there, then I come back for my third year to my original institution, and then I go away for something else. I see a lot more smorgasbords, breakfast buffets, where students will pick and choose from different institutions. And because we don't want to lose the source of income, we will have to get into alliances where we offer interesting pathways for students to go into different institutions. And we also will have a mix of blended learning and face-to-face learning. Ladies and gentlemen, these are exciting times. I know what's going on around me. I really don't know what I need to do about it, except for like a good academic experiment, do research and learn. But I do know that the indicators show me that I will have to go to a situation whereby we will really need to change our pedagogy to make it a lot more experiential. Secondly, that we will have to put the responsibility with the students for their own learning. Thirdly, that because of that second point, we will need to provide better learning analytics and help the students discover what they actually have learned, what they actually have mastered. And fourthly, in order to deliver that, we will need very, very different institutions than we have today. So those among you who are educators, I invite you to work together with me, experiment with me, so that we can learn from each other. Thank you very much.
I think, very good afternoon, Dean Srivastava, my co-speaker, President of Singapore Management University. Let me tell you, you haven't lost touch with your academics. You make a wonderful professor, in spite of having the cap of a president. I too I'm playing a similar role. Prior to my current assignment, I was a dean at the business school. I was a teacher. So whenever I get an opportunity now or an invite, I take it to the first this thing, because for a faculty, for a teacher, nothing more important than at least talking to a good number of students or informed participants like you. Let me thank ISB for inviting me here for this interactive dialogue on how do you disrupt higher education, or how do you change the face of higher education. I see Jay here, one of my good friend, one of the prominent persons who has taught us disruption in the city of Hyderabad. I must acknowledge Jay's contribution. Harish Manglik, who's a former chairman of NASCOM, and faculty, students, industry representatives. I'll not take much time, but I would love to take some questions after that, or probably suggestions, because as you know, we are in Telangana, and Telangana is the youngest state, along with my other state, sister state, Andhra. And what we are trying to do in Telangana, I would not like to dwell upon all the initiatives, but let me just give a backdrop of what's happening. Institutions like ISB can play a major role in forging alliances, in getting people together, and I think today is one of its kind. If you look at the collaborative or the efforts between Asia and the other parts of the world, you find that Asia is slowly emerging as an economic powerhouse. A significant economic trend of our time is its rise. By 2030, Asia is estimated to be larger than the United States and the European Union combined. It's also taught us some lessons as to what it would mean to be really number one in the world, or to really take it forward. And what are the differences we have from the rest of the world? Just giving a backdrop, contextually, we are very rich in variety of philosophical traditions and religions. We are also governed by social relationships, which still remain a strong force in maintaining social order and strategy. Culturally, though it's criticized often that power distance refers, we maintain a lot of hierarchies and the systems you're talking about. Still, research has indicated that people from the East regard distribution of power as more acceptable than people in the West. Another difference is the communication styles and the management styles. I think all of them have worked over the years, and we now see that people are slowly recognizing and respecting this difference, which is becoming a kind of which was earlier a divide, but now it's becoming a kind of a bridge between both this thing. If you look at the educational system, and often I have been for a long time having very strong ideas about why don't we have an Indian management system. Though typically you cannot say there could be an Indian management system, but and of course, just referring back to what Dean Srivastava said, I have another very interesting connection with Dean Srivastava. Jack Sheth and we worked on many projects, and in fact, whenever he's in Hyderabad, Professor Jagdish Sheth and I catch up on many occasions, and we start talking about why don't we look at something different, something which has a mix of all, kind of an ambicultural educational system, which can marry some of the concepts from the West, also some from within, and create an entirely new breed of professionals who can be future ready, as you rightly said. Our education system, most of the time, puts the students in front as recipients. I extend one more logic what President has said. He was talking about the sage on the stage, and today we are talking about the guide by the side. So do we really do this? It's a question which we need to look into, Indian management or Indian higher education system. We look at students as recipients. We also look at making people productive, do it at a time, at a stretch, we have 10 plus 2 followed by graduation and post-graduation and whatnot, postdoc, doctoral, postdoc at a time. We do not give an opportunity to the student to probably test his entrepreneurial skills or probably test his ideas or probably speak out. In short, students of today in our systems neither have a choice nor a voice. So our question is, how do you change this? How do you get to follow the best of these practices? One, we can look at blending the East and West for holistic education. Some of the terms I may be using may be little very high sounding, but I'll come back to the strategy next, maybe in the next couple of minutes. It's to aim at the fullest development of the person, encouraging the students or the participants to the very best or finest that they can have that experience of probably learning by doing and probably learning by seeing and learning by experimenting. We need to bring in a lot of creativity and critical thinking. And of course, we have to look at teaching as a facilitation role. And to begin with, probably we could look at adapting some of the best practices. And probably one of the times I was talking in a conference, we were thinking about why don't we look at Western programs with Eastern internships and Eastern programs with Western internships, a kind of an immersion program. 2 weeks back, I was in Poland as a visiting professor, and I was talking to the university, which is incidentally 100-year-old. Poland itself is 100-year-old. And by the way, I am born in a year when Singapore became free. It's 1965. So when you look at all this, and when you look at grand universities, great universities in the world, you'll find that they have evolved. But they have not lost their original fabric under which they have been put up. So the Polish, one of the students, I asked at the end, what's the feedback? And the faculty told me the lectures were very good, they liked it. And one student wrote to me that they liked the lectures. And I said, what part of the lectures you liked most? And to my surprise, they said, we would like to know more about India, because I had shown them Indian recess, Indian cuisine, to give an orientation. So sometimes it could be very embarrassing that what you thought is going to be communicated is received in some other manner, that they like the Indian food, the salwars, the bindis, and all the cultural aspects of India. But anyway, we have communicated something across. Now I'll come to the higher education space in India. We have a problem of dealing with a very big educational system or students to cater to. Yesterday I was looking at the figures. We are home to around 850 universities, public and private, 45,000 colleges, higher education institutions standalone around 12,000, student enrollment around 4 crores, and the gross enrollment ratio is 25 as compared to probably 45 or 50, which many of these economies or advanced countries have. Another challenge is coming to the business schools. When I was a student way back in '87, very few business schools, mostly taught in the university. In 2012, there were 360,000 students who are getting admitted into business schools. And last year, the data shows that it is 520,000, almost a 40% increase in the intake of business schools. But there is a criticism from industry always. I meet with my industry friends, CII, NASCOM, and all the friends, and they say 13% are employable. 22% can speak better. So these are some of the challenges we are facing. And I think it's in that perspective. I'm not trying to say that, we do not have talent. In fact, I'm a consultant to APO, and last year we did a study and found that by 2020, 60% of the young population of this world who need higher education in different forms, this is a big challenge. How do we give to them? But I'll now highlight some of the good things in the higher education sector the government and the country has gone about. India is among the top 5 countries, globally cited, research output. Research capabilities are boosted by annual R&D spends totaling US $150 billion. The regional hub for higher education, attracting global learners. In fact, whenever I visit ISB, I see that whenever it makes waves, whenever I see news in the news, I feel happy that there is an institution, and that too in Telangana, in Hyderabad, probably Hyderabad, that's making waves. So this is the kind of a thing we need to aim at, that we need to get people from across the globe. We need to accept that we have different models, but how do we blend these models? Our student population is probably 60% of the world population, and to sum up, The universities are best in class of knowledge creators, problem solvers, etc. And what we are looking at is India at 75. I remember there was a very passionate speech by C.K. Prahlad, often quoted about India at 2030. And I'll probably quote one or two things, if time permits, in 2-3 minutes. So the issue is now, how do you handle this? Prahlad talks about 3 types of universities, and I'll come to the management schools. In fact, when we come to the management schools, we are home to almost, we are almost having 5,500 business schools. Last year, AICTE, which is the regulator, apart from some of these sector skills or specialized business schools like retail and some other agri-business schools, etc., fintech related, etc. So look at 5,500 schools in a country like India, next to the United States. And so Prahlad talks about 3 tiers of educational system, 3 types of universities. One, the top, the research focused, which focus on research and innovation. The second, we are career focused, the tech universities, professional colleges. We want to make good civil engineers, mechanical engineers, the foundation universities, which are very holistic, which give a broad spectrum of skills. So the challenges are that how do you, with this large number of students and institutions dispersed across regions, states, how do you bring in a uniformity or probably a structured learning? The biggest question is, how do you bring in diversity into the classroom? How do you bring in the differentiation among the students? And how do you accomplish areas of expansion and equity which are shadowed by the lack and quality and excellence in higher education? So there's a need for 21st century problem-solving communication skills. I'll not get into the other aspects, but I'll quickly sum up what in Telangana we are doing it now, because that's what my primary responsibility is, being at the helm of affairs as the vice chair of the council. I'll quickly summarize. One of the issues we first found out was the 4 R's. And what are these 4 R's? Relevance of the courses. We need to redesign these courses, reorient these courses, and focus on research. These are the 4 R's. We are looking at giving impetus to academic standards, research, and an academic culture. Pedagogical innovations, rightly said. Building linkages across universities. Gone are the days when the university was a standalone and having a reputation for itself under 4 walls and closeted and not interacting with the crowd. Today, universities are dynamic organizations. They need to interact with society, with the stakeholders. So we are building up global partnerships. We want to build up universities which can work with the global context. And most importantly, we are also looking at fostering an ecosystem of innovation, incubation, and entrepreneurship. Most of the graduates today come to me, they say, when I ask them, why did you join an engineering program? They say, my parents forced me. And when I ask them, what do you want to do? They say, I want to join an IT job or a company or some kind of a... So today you have a scenario of predictable courses, predictable learning, predictable outcomes, predictable careers. This has to be disrupted. This has to be broken. This kind of a system which does not encourage out of box. So the students of today in our system are becoming victims of their own training. So we want to really demolish, disrupt this, and finally build up industry, university, or industry educational institution interface. So the reforms we are undertaking are, we are trying to look at strengthening the academic numbers, because most of the universities suffer from faculty, and the number of vacancies are very mind-boggling. We have introduced a choice-based credit system, the cafeteria approach where you can pick up anything, but there are issues in it. We have introduced, and if I tell you some of the statistics, when I joined this assignment, it was very difficult for me, because every year there are 4 lakh students who pass out of 10 plus 2, and 2 lakhs get into the university. And for all these 2 lakhs, we have given an online platform now, which they can choose a college they want to. The challenge is, how does a student from a rural area come to Hyderabad to study? This was not available earlier. So one of the things we said is, bring in more diversity into the classroom, more girl students, because as I see, more number of girls will come into the higher education system. I'll take two more minutes. And then we want to introduce the curriculum, which needs a complete updation, because when I see, for example, computer science courses being offered in graduate colleges, I find that everybody offers in their own way, their own with likes and dislikes. So we want to probably look at that and finally build up student-centric academic processes. I had the good fortune of visiting all the finest universities, including NUS and SMU, and every time we travel abroad and interact with the deans, I always ask a question, can't we do it here? And I think we can. Lastly, how did Singapore build up its educational system? I was reading somewhere, and one of the 3 tenets on which they built it up was, first, economic, focus on export-oriented industrialization. 2, social, to strengthen unity amongst everyone. 3, educational, to build an educational ecosystem or systems appropriate to emerging socio-economic needs. And that's what Prahlad said in his talk about India at 2030. And I think we need to do this. And finally, what are the areas we can collaborate other than management education? Of course, management education is one of the vehicles. Some of the areas I outlined out of my brief, this thing is that one of the things is work very closely with good institutions in India, probably select tier-wise, some two top more institutions, like in management education we have in India, premier institutions like the IIMs, ISBs, university-led business schools, autonomous business schools, specific sector-based business. So pick up 2 or 3 in each of these, start working with them, promote innovation at a graduation level, build high-tech research infrastructure. I think Singapore has done exceedingly well. And how do you optimize your available space and this thing? So I think we can do that and increase this flow of students. I think one of the greatest things we can do is to throw up higher education to students all around the world, which helps them to appreciate. And today I was reading in a news report that there's 49% of students in the United States are from China and India. Why not we look at a model where we can attract Asian students, similarly vice versa, our own students learning from the best of these universities. And some of the industry sectors I have looked at are aerospace. Hyderabad is fast emerging as the aerospace hub. Long back it was predicted that the Bangalore and Hyderabad would be the hub and spoke model. Electronics, precision engineering, professional services, urban solutions. We need a lot of support from Singapore consultants, Singapore academics, logistics, pharma, and pharma biotechnology. I think I would love to speak more, but I think to respect the time which has been given. To me, it looks like this is going to be the age, and this is going to be the decade of the Asian this decade. And we need to leverage on this. We need to work very closely. And I think on behalf of the government of Telangana, I would like to assure you that we would be taking the first step forward if you have any such proposals to work with the government. In turn, we can work with the universities across and the higher education system in general. And of course, B schools, which is my, the area which I love most. Thank you very much, Dean Srivastava, for giving me this opportunity.
So we now have perspectives from North America, from Europe, from Singapore, and thank you, Professor Ramana, for bringing us down to ground. And so we only have a few minutes left, in this session. So we'd like to jump directly to questions from the audience. Yes, sir.
Colleges, especially because we have Amirpet in Hyderabad, which is doing such a fabulous job. And there are other things like that, private small institutions, which give you skills, which should be enough for a person not to need to go to college or a university at all. Do you think that's a realistic situation?
Arnoud, yeah.
Very quick answer to that. I'm very convinced that not everybody has to go to university. Some of the most successful countries in the world, and I think of Switzerland as an example, have only 17% of their cohort going to university per year. That's much lower than in any other industrialized country in Europe, Japan, Korea, etc. And yet Switzerland is a very successful country. Why is that? Because people appreciate and put a lot of value on skills training, on also education which is delivered by schools that work very closely together with industry and that, where there's a lot of training through internship. So I just say that to indicate that there are countries and systems that have developed alternative pathways to success. But that requires a very strong change in culture, where you actually recognize that a university degree is for those who like university degrees, but it's not necessarily better than other pathways. That's what has happened in Switzerland. It is what's happening to some extent in Germany, but it's not at all the case what's happening at other countries. So it's a lot more, it's more than simply having good institutions. It requires a total reorganization of the society.
Professor Meyer, I have a question.
We have one more answer.
I wanted to just supplement. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah. You're referring to this Amirpet. It's called the 3,000.
Fabulous.
You know,
So
3,000 crores almost
it.
is a turnover, right? But what I feel, because being in the system, these courses which these institutes are churning out is only for the short term. Let me tell you, they can get you a good job temporarily. But down the line, if you really want to have a career which helps you to really try your creativity or try to build up more, you need to have some kind of an education. What kind, what form, it's up to you. But we fully agree that learning also takes outside the classroom, and this distinction between classroom and outside percentages vary from course to course. For example, you want to be a good engineer, you want to have the foundation or conceptual knowledge, you need to go to school, and that to a good school. Okay, I just wanted to supplement. It's no way to disagree with you.
So before we come to you, sir, let me just add, I think this is a very important question. So education, as we very often see it, is classroom education. Just a small story. About 6-7 years ago, I had come from Singapore to India, and I was looking at how can we look at education in areas, vocational education, plumbing, air conditioning, so on and so forth. And there's good jobs available, plenty of opportunity. And so one of my mentors in Singapore was President Nathan at that time. And so when I came back, he said, so Raj, what did you learn and what did you do? And I said, I was talking to the ITEs. And he had a pained look on his face. And he says, look, so I said, what did I say wrong? He says, what you should really do is in Singapore, we get a lot of people who are doing welding, they're doing this, they're doing that, and they have built a metro system. Why can't you figure out a way that these people have now gone back after 3 years? Why can't you set up a schooling system where they teach people how to weld, how to manage air conditioning? So when we think of education, we think college education. There's a lot to be learned and a lot that needs to be done. So I think that's a very important question that you asked.
I want to disagree with the welding and plumbing thing. I mean, education out of college should also be for data science, for more higher levels of education.
No, agreed.
It's a perspective.
No, we can certainly expand.
I have a question for Professor
We
Myers.
have another question, yeah.
So it's very interesting, you mentioned about the Oxford study and also the latest OECD report. I have been trying to get some information in this area, and a lot of data and estimates and projections are available in these papers and the reports. Do you have some information of actual situation which has happened in the last couple of years in, let's say, US or in India in terms of change or loss of jobs due to automation? Any actual figures are also available?
Yes, there are actually, I must now say that I speak from memory, and so I don't have the exact numbers in mind. But the actual loss of jobs over the last 10 years is probably around 14 to 15% of the jobs. I'm talking about surveys in the industrialized world, OECD again. Having said that, there are a lot of new jobs created, and in sense, until now, the net job creation, thanks to automation, use of artificial intelligence, whatever, the net job creation is positive. But the people who lost a job are not the ones that gotten the new jobs. So there is displacement, and there is a group of forgotten people who lost their jobs because of automation. And there's a huge demand for people who can actually come up with the robotization, the systems engineering, the artificial intelligence, whatever. And there is a lack of matching. So there is an enormous demand for continuing education. And I wanted to come back to the previous question by saying, if you go to a system that is not built on an university education, but much more on a skills-based education, you also have to invest enormously in continuing education. Because people's skills become obsolete, and you need to adjust them to the new situation. So yes, there are loss of jobs. Yes, there is creation of jobs, but it's not the same people.
Professor, I have a question. My name is Mirza Abdullah. I am into competency building. I want to know, you said one of the things that you're doing at the university is accountability on the part of a student. How do you bring that in this age where there is a lot of temptation, a lot of disturbance for the students? How do you engage them and make them accountable? What are the steps or the strategies?
Well, we still have one issue that we have on our side, and that is we are the only ones that give degrees. The student can give them a degree themselves, right? She cannot say, oh, I'm going to do this and this and this course and then award myself a degree in business. We still have that power, and it's probably the only power that universities have, that is the degree granting power. So I can say to the student, in order to get a degree, you need to do these things. And in our cases, it's 36 courses. You need to do your community service. You need to go overseas. You need to do your internship. You need to do this and that and that and that. That's what I will require to give you a degree. But how you do it, I couldn't care less. And that's what we do with what we call our bidding system. That is, we give our students points to bid with. We call it e-dollars. And they bid for courses. And they organize themselves. And if they decide that they want to take off half a semester, if they decide they want to only study on Mondays and Wednesdays because the rest they want to either work or goof off, they organize themselves. And that is, I think, going in the right direction. Put the responsibility with the student. She will live up to it. I'm not so sure.
Professor,
yes.
I have a... the management education role in Tier 3, Tier 4 institutions in India, how can we develop that? Only Ivy League or a premier institutes have much exposure to the industry. How does the Tier 3, Tier 4 institutions will have that exposure and they get properly skilled?
This is, first of all, I think with the technology moving the way it is, there's plenty of scope for shared content. And increasingly, what we find is that part of the learning actually has to be experiential. So, we keep talking about blended learning. What can we, and the blended is a combination of online and face-to-face. And with that, you combine some of the learning by actually doing, and this is the apprenticeship system that is very popular in places like Germany. So,
can I just, very right question, I think, in this context. Tier 3, Tier 4 schools can benefit immensely from the MOOCs platform. We in Telangana are planning that a student in graduate programs can take some courses on the MOOCs, and then we will give them credits. So I think that's number one. Number two, faculty with an industry background. So far, in the higher education system, we go by a very straitjacket method that you need to have a doctoral degree to be a faculty. And now we are planning to have industry experts to be invited as faculty who can bring in this industry experience and bring it to the classroom. So I think the third one is you have your boards or you have your advisory bodies with some industry experts. Many, many years back, I invited JA to my university because that's the way you can get the insights into industry. I think these three, and of course the last one, I'm glad that the regulator in India, AICTE, which is often quoted for wrong reasons, has recently realized that the engineering content we are teaching is very high than what is required. So they lowered, it's the first time that they lowered the syllabus. And they are insisting on internship. And I think these are the 4 things, at least to my view, which will bring in a lot of industry exposure, which will make your graduates better. And finally, it's the industry which will decide who is better. So gone are the days when you can just walk in with a degree, walk out of a university and say, I'm the best of breed. Today, the industry will determine. And I think that's the solution. Thank you. If I have answered right.
Yeah. Thank you,
Professor.
Yes.
So first of all, since we talked about this higher education, I think higher education in our country is in a somewhat gold-rush kind of situation. Now, what is the relevance of AICTE in today's world? Because AICTE, I don't think so. It is coming out with some kind of creative methods or doing a radical reforms in education system, but it is trying to suppress the creative minds in the education system itself. Because some of the creative professors who have put up their own institutions, it has asked them to close down. And sometime back in 2012 itself, it has objected to a world-class professional program being offered by CFA Institute itself. I think they asked them not to carry on in India, that CFA program. And after some negotiations, etc., the students were allowed to write the examination maybe in 2013 or so. So I don't think so today that AICTE has a very relevance, and especially the kind of engineering education which we are having in the country. I think we are churning out only clerical cadre kind of staff out of.
So I don't think you have a question, you have a statement. But I will let Professor.
I think it's more pertaining about the regulator, and I think it's an opinion which we need. But one thing I can certainly say, that there needs to be a body which will at least follow up or work together with institutions. Otherwise, we are not still that matured in that system that we can have institutions flourishing everywhere. So I think eventually the Prime Minister Modi is talking about integrating both UGC and AICTE. I think good days are ahead. Let's not be pessimistic. I think Indian higher education system will be one of the best in the years to come. And you will have an agency which will be a combination. You might not be knowing that there are 13 regulatory agencies in higher education in India. And they want to bring it into 2 or 3, which will have a kind of, which will give a direction. And I think you will be very happy to know that the Niti Aayog, the erstwhile Planning Commission, is also working on higher education space. So no need to get worried. This is only a transition phase, and I think good things will come in a couple of years.
Okay, we are running out of time.
Sir,
I think we
one
should
question.
take the next panel.
Yes, we're running way behind time. Okay, and we can have some conversations.
Sir, can I have one question, please? One question.
If there's any question that's going to be answered, it's from this floor. Okay. Yes, sir. Okay, this is the absolute last one, and no long statements, please.
Just 2 points actually. Since it's about management schools here, today's actually environment, other than just matrix driven and data driven, there are a lot of software elements which are required in terms of inclusivity, in terms of ability to remove internal bias which managers have. Those are important elements, and here we have education institutions where engineers, actually students from schools join techno schools and then go from one coaching center to another, and tomorrow they are taking human element decisions. One on that. Second point is on this skilling part. Skilling and reskilling has become a huge business today. What is it that educational institutions can do in terms of partnering with them, or trying to ensure that this process is eliminated or maybe used effectively?
All right, I think you made your point. It's also very clear that with all the preparation that's going for the joint engineering exam, that actually has become an educational institution itself, and lots of people are learning because they're preparing for the JEE. And I'm afraid we must bring the one last
I'm sorry,
point.
but I thought worth mentioning, I forgot. Singapore has got some of the best examples of polytechnic colleges, Temasek or. So I think what we need to do in India is to probably categorize what kind of skills we require and who can go for this. And we need to strengthen the skilling initiative. Mm-hmm. And I'm hopeful that probably by the next dialogue we'll have wonderful institutions working with Singapore and other countries. Thank you very much.
I hope so too.
I'd like to thank our panelists, and I'd like to thank the audience for the huge level of involvement. Thank you.
Raj, would you please give away mementos to both of them?